Welcome back to the Respect the Drive podcast. I'm Tedward here at Garage 42 in Acton, Massachusetts, where I store my cars. This place is just magical. I'm here because I wanted to come in and do a podcast, but every time I walk in the door, it always gets derailed because there's people here that I want to hang out and talk with. So I probably got here over an hour ago, maybe like an hour and a half ago, and I've just been like hanging out, talking with the guys. And it's great because my buddy Chris of the Depreciation Society, who has all those, Maybachs and Bentleys and the Rolls Royces you've seen on my channel, he's here like all the time. And it's so funny because it's just a place that I know that I'm going to run into him. And I hope that I run into him because I love hearing his stories about what he's buying, what he's selling, what's going on in his life and everything. And especially, oh my God, the repairs that the fleet that he operates needs is always just, it'll make you, if you're someone like me who daily drives basically a Honda Civic Type R and a Lexus GX460, it'll make you happy that that's the level of cars that you're having to maintain most of the time. It's easy to get a little jealous and sidetracked when you're young and thinking, ooh, I want to have all these fancy cars. But the reality is you might not. It might break you completely. But anyway, how are you? Are you doing all right? This is going to be a solo show. I want to try something a little different because I don't want to always have to rely on the crutch of an hour-long interview with somebody. And I don't know, we can just have a chat. It's the winter right now. It's late February in New England. I don't know if you're a New Englander, where you're from. If you're from California, this means nothing to you. But in New England, winter is typically sort of like end of October or early November through the end of March and sometimes into early April because we always get like those sneaky little snowstorms that creep up. But right now, what we're getting is the false hope of spring. It's 40 degrees, maybe even 45 degrees today. There's snow everywhere on the ground and it's starting to melt, which is nice. It gives you this thought of like, oh, we're done. But it just never feels done. You always end up with a cold snap that it's 15 degrees again, an extra snowstorm. And a lot of people will pull their cars out early. I typically am smart enough not to do this because I've been there. I've pulled the car out. I've taken the 911 out, realized, yeah, maybe the salt is gone. Maybe it has rained enough. Maybe we're in an okay position to actually drive the car safely. But the reality is the potholes aren't gone. And the roads are torn up and it's just a nightmare. So I'm hanging tight and I'm glad that I bought a mom car. I do miss driving my E92 M3 as a daily driver. I think it was fun and entertaining in the winter because it was like a statement, I mean, not like that big of a statement. This isn't that huge of a thing, but it was a statement to have your, 8,000 RPM V8 in rear-wheel drive car on a set of, at the time, Vredestein Wintrack Pros being like, well, I don't need all-wheel drive. I don't need to be driving a Subaru or whatever to get through the winter. I can do this. And you would be in the car community slightly admired for this because it was like, oh man, he's a real one, But I got to tell you, having a big Lexus body on frame SUV is pretty nice because I don't think about potholes. I don't think about, oh, the road's a little torn up over here. I don't think about ground clearance when I'm parking. Oh my God. I was parking up in Lowell a few weeks ago after a snowstorm and there were all these empty spaces that are normally full, but the reason they weren't full was because none of the other cars could fit in them because of the snow, like the humps of snow and ice that had built up at those parking spaces. You couldn't get into them anymore because someone had essentially parked there during a snowstorm, gotten out while the snow was soft, and then the plows come and everything, and then it just hardens. And you can't, you need like a proper metal steel spade and a chisel to get these things out. Whereas in the Lexus, it was like, well, I have enough ground clearance to get over it, and I could park. I got primo parking, but that's not something I could have done in the M3. And God, the guy who owns my M3 now, he's actually pretty local. He lives near Renscott. I sold him my snow tires and wheels, and those I used to pride myself on having never curbed any wheels. I curbed the shit out of those wheels one winter because I couldn't see where the curbs were. And I don't mean like parallel parking. I mean like I would take a corner to the right and suddenly I'm like, oh, I just bumped a curb. And like, so I gashed those up pretty good, which is a real bummer. I don't think about that with the Lexus. A, I haven't done it, but B, even if I did it, there's so much sidewall that it just wouldn't ever touch the thing. So I do think that's nice to have like a proper, beater daily. And I know that's not a beater. It's a nice vehicle. It's a brand new truck. It's a good thing. And it's leather, well, fake leather, but heated seats, heated steering wheel, all insane sound system, all the goodies. And I probably pay the price on YouTube for not having an extreme vehicle in the winter, because YouTube favors the crazy. YouTube favors people who are like, I'm daily driving my 600 LT, like that's what YouTube favors. But I do think I came around to a point where I'm like, there is a compromise in my mental health and sanity day to day that I would rather be like happy in what I'm driving and not worried about the vehicles than just showing off for the internet, which, to my detriment, probably impacted the views, because my God, everyone seemed to love those E92 snow videos. But anyway, enough about that. I do remember driving to work when I was working in corporate America and pulling into the parking lot, and I would see all these people who were my peers or even superiors driving like ordinary cars, whether it was like a Beat Corolla or like a Lexus ES 300 or something, fairly ordinary cars, and pulling in with the BMWs and the Porsche and whatever I was driving. I would start to envy those cars, and I'd be like, God, I wish I could just stand to drive those, because all they have to do is like 5-quart oil changes like every 10,000 miles, and their maintenance is nothing, and their tires are essentially free. They're like Ling Long crosswinds, and you wouldn't even care if you put bad tires on. Meanwhile, I'm driving from Boston like 30 miles down to this office every day, stacking miles on my M3, and every time it sends a check engine light, it's like, oh boy, what fresh hell are we in for today? Pardon me while I take a little sip of my tea, which, I'm not like a huge tea drinker, but from the channel that I'm a big coffee guy, and I just had a cup of coffee, and I'm like, I always think that the answer is more caffeine. It's not. So I know I'm rambling, but I just came in and I noticed that Garage 42 put up a reel, and the reel was a tire mounting video. And I realized, oh, those are my wheels and tires. I bought a track set of wheels and tires I didn't buy the tires. Bridgestone actually sent me these RE71 RSs, which I'm very, very grateful for. I do love Bridgestone, and this is my favorite 200 treadwear tire. Objectively, it's probably stickier than a typical 200 treadwear. They're really, oh my God, these tires are incredible. I drove them at Atlanta Motorsports Park a while back in the Civic Si TCA car. I always forget what TCA and TCR is. I think it was a TCA car. But essentially, Civic Si race car on RE71Rs. It might as well have been on slicks. This is crazy, which I actually have driven. That the first time I drove one of those Civic Sis was on slicks in Nashville. And I'm so impressed with these RE71RSs that I knew that that's what I needed to put on the FL5 for track stuff, because I absolutely have been not doing my hobbies. I haven't been doing stuff that I actually like to do. And this year, I don't want to call it a resolution. I don't do resolutions because then I'm a failure when I don't do them. But one of my goals, let's just say, is to start doing stuff that just makes me happy. Start like honing in on some skills. And track driving is a skill that I want to improve upon, let's say. I'm an okay driver. I'm not a bad driver. I'm not out there doing wheel to wheel or even really time attack, but I know that I can get faster. I can be more balanced. I can be smoother. And I want to just do that over and over and over again this spring because I have the car for it. And I bought the Lexus basically in order to alleviate some of the daily duties of the Honda so that it can be a little more track oriented. And I don't know, I don't go so crazy. There's my friend out in NorCal, Fenton, Zygreen on YouTube. He has what is it, DC5, DE5? I always forget how these things work. Whatever the Acura Type S is, the Integra Type S, basically the same car as my car. And he's gone crazy with this thing. He's got like Olin suspension. He actually has the same wheels as me, which I thought I was such hot shit buying these Apex wheels in gold, like a rose motorsports gold or whatever. It's like a rose gold color. And I thought, oh, this is going to look so good. No one's doing this. And I look, of course, Fenton did this like months ago and I just didn't notice. But he's pretty hardcore. And he's always at like Laguna Seca and all those kind of tracks up and down the California coast. And I am very jealous of that. Not in like an envious way, but in a way that I'm like, why am I not doing this? I need to be doing this. So I'm not going to go quite as hardcore as he is in terms of modifications, but I am going to try to get a lot of seat time. And that to me is the point. It's not necessarily about lap times, it's about seat time. So that's one of my goals for this year, is to get that seat time. But this is the thing. Now's the time to plan those things, because everyone in New England right now is like either really wealthy and in the Caribbean or somewhere warm, or they're like me and they're just getting exhausted, mentally drained, pretty depressed, sick of the snow, sick of the cold. I need some sunlight, and it's difficult. And that brings me to my next point, is just physical well-being is a difficult thing in the winter out here, because for example, I'm a runner. Okay. I like to run, and my typical running thing is like 20 miles a week. I'm not the fastest runner. It's the same thing as driving. It's like, I don't need to beat Ryan Eversley around a racetrack. Wouldn't that be nice? But I do just, you want to get seat time. You want to get time out doing the thing. So, for me, I'd run 20 miles a week, try to do 5-6 days. But the problem is that, I'm in my mid 30s. Any injuries that you've ever accrued over your lifetime will start to be exacerbated around this time. I know there's guys in their 50s and 60s who listen to this and they're going to go, "Oh, you're still a baby. Like, shut the fuck up." But the reality is, I don't heal as fast from things anymore. All my friends want to go skiing and snowboarding and stuff all the time, and I'm actually a little nervous to do it because I've watched all of them get significant injuries. Eddie broke his shoulder and was like out of commission for months. I mean, he had to have surgery. It was a whole shit show. And they're the ones who are like, "Oh, you got to come. It's fun." I'm like, "Yeah, is it worth that? Because I wouldn't be able to work if I actually hurt myself like that." But as for the running, like my right knee, I get this patellar tendonitis, which means that like overuse will swell that tendon, and it's pretty painful. It's not fun. It started in my 20s. I remember when I was working at like a corporate company. I was traveling all over the world working in these big factories they're printing factories essentially for fabrics. And I was walking through this facility in Panyu, China, which is outside of Guangzhou, or I guess it is Guangzhou. I don't know, but it's a city of Panyu. And I remember walking through this facility with some knee pain, and then it got so bad that I couldn't walk. I had to just stay in the conference room. And I was probably only like 24, 25 at the time. And it took, I want to say, like 6 weeks for that to actually recover. And I was not running at that point. That was something that I was just overuse, wearing like heavy, clunky steel toe work boots and stuff. And it just did my knee in. And I think sitting in the airplanes as much as I did, because I'd have to fly to Hong Kong like every month. So remember, every month, at least a 16-hour flight, 2 directions. So 16 hours from Newark to Hong Kong, 16 hours from Hong Kong to Newark. Like, there's a lot of sitting in that position. Was not great because I was not in first or business class. No, I have logged a lot of coach miles that probably, to my body's detriment, did not appreciate. So that was the beginning of me really realizing that knee was going to be a problem. And then, running, running is a weird thing because it starts as like a thing where you have to fight to do it, because everyone hates running. Everyone who doesn't run says they hate running. They're like, that's awful. Running is miserable. It's not fun. So if you want to be a runner, you have to first fight through that initial bit of hatred for the sport. And then once you start doing it, what happens is it's like a drug. A switch flips, because there are these nice fleeting moments where you become a golden retriever chasing a ball. So you get out there and you start running, and the first few times you do it, you hate it. You do it for a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks, I think it takes before you start like enjoying it, or it becomes a habit. So you have to do it because you're like, "Oh, I didn't run today, so I got to go do my run." And then you start to realize, you're like, "Oh, this is the only thing keeping my brain from being a shambles. It's your mental health. It is your therapy. It is the thing that takes the chaos of your brain and organizes it." And as much as I love driving cars, and as much as I love jumping into a GT3 RS or a McLaren and like ripping around some back roads and stuff, it's not the same as getting your heart rate up for 30 to 45 minutes and kind of just, or it's like sleep, honestly, like organizes your brain, and it takes away a lot of the stress and depression and anxiety that just pervades someone like me, which is just all of the time, unfortunately, but whatever. And I for me, I found it was a way to kind of get off of medication, like an SSRI. Now, I'm not playing a game of saying, oh, I don't like SSRIs. If you need to take them, take them. For me, it just dulled me a lot. And I felt like, like I'm missing out on some emotions that I probably would like to have. That's all. So running for me helped that. Now, the problem with that is when it becomes your therapy, it becomes your medication, you need to listen to your body when it's in pain. And I didn't do that. I would just keep running through the pain. And for what? Like, I wasn't training for a race. I wasn't training for a marathon. I wasn't even training for a 5K. It was just because it was a habit and I had to do it. And because running became my identity. So if I wasn't running, well, am I really a runner? You know, like, well, you got to do it to be it. So I would just keep running. And then I'd be like, oh, my knee hurts a little bit, but it's fine today. It's okay. It's not that bad. And then I'd overuse it, and then it would get really bad, and then I'd have to stop. I'd have to sit out. And I would like sit out for 3 weeks thinking, oh, that's enough time. It's healed. And then I'd get back out there. It wasn't healed. And this cycle of re-injury. That's the problem. So in the meantime, you got to find new ways to stay fit, because if you're running like crazy, you can eat whatever the fuck you want if you're a runner. Like if you're running 20, 30 miles a week, which by the way, not that much in relation to like these crazy D1 athlete kids who do like 90 to 100 miles a week. But if you're running like 20, 30 miles a week, like you absolutely can just eat. Like you can have whatever you want. It's like you just lean out. It's wild. And you start thinking like, oh, this is my normal body. But then when you have to sit out for a few weeks, you're like, oh shit, like this isn't. I'm putting on a little bit of body fat. So you got to find other ways, whether it's like an elliptical or spinning or just going to the gym and lifting. And I started doing that because I wanted to put on a little bit of muscle mass, but it's weird. People are so obsessed with putting on mass and all this stuff. I just wanted to be kind of healthy and like look a little better. But then just like running, you start becoming obsessed with that. And I'm a small person. Like I'm not a big beefy dude, but I can lift more than you'd. I'm like one of those, I think you'd call it a sleeper build. Like I'm like a little stronger than you'd think, but I don't think I'm ever going to become like an Instagram influencer muscle dude who's like, look at my transformation. I used to be a worthless piece of shit because I only weighed 130 pounds and now I'm a real man. Like, these people are crazy. It is disturbing how the influencer culture has shaped that type of thing, because all these like before and after things, especially what's bizarre about these before and after things, a lot of these influencers who show their before photos, I'm like, you look great. These people look so good. They looked healthy and athletic. And then they show their after picture where they're like, now I'm finally valid. And I'm like, oh shit, you look disgusting and steroided and like something's wrong with you mentally, because this is not healthy. Like whatever's going on, whatever led you to this like level of physique is actually scary to me, because I'm like, are you okay? Like you want to be, I don't look up to that. I'm like, oh, are you okay? Like that's crazy. So I just want to throw that out there. Like for people who listen and are part of the social media consumption world, which at this point is everybody, make sure that you take stock of what you're looking at, because a lot of this stuff very casually tells you you're a worthless piece of shit if you don't look like this. Or, you look at a before picture and it's better than you've ever looked in your life. And they're basically saying like, this was when I was a piece of garbage and now I'm valid because I'm huge. Like you're valid now, just go. And a thing that kept me out of the gym for a long time was simply because I don't like to enter situations where I don't have a routine, right? Building a routine is difficult. And that to me kept me off the racetrack for a long time, because you'd go there, the thought of going to a racetrack and not knowing exactly what to expect, or like, what if I don't blend correctly when I pull out of pit lane? What if I do something that pisses somebody off? What if I cause a problem? Like the funny thing is all those questions are good things to be concerned with, because it means you're going to be a conscientious driver, right? And then when you get there, you're going to learn and someone's going to teach you and you're going to figure it out as long as you have an open mind. The same goes for like the gym, where you go in and you're like, yeah, you might look like a chicken with its head cut off at first when you're kind of like, okay, what's the organization of this building and how do I jump in on a set here or blah, blah, blah. You just figure it out. So I do like that I finally over the last like year or two, started just going to a gym by myself and not being afraid of anybody, because everyone's there for the same reason, man. Everyone's just there to go lift weights, get some aggression out, and get through their day and try to like not have a heart attack. That's it. That's what everyone's there for. But all to say, trying to maintain some like level of fitness throughout the winter has helped a lot, because I get so down. I get so blue, and like the best cars are put away. You know, my cars are put away. I want to go drive fun things. And luckily with Bond Group, we still have auction sales. So we did a group right now. It's actually live right now. Group P7, which is a collaboration between Bond Group and Road Scholars, Cam Ingram down in North Carolina. They put up this like fleet of Porsches, and I shot 7 of them. So if you don't know what I do, I make YouTube videos, but I also, a lot of the cars that you see that are from Bond Group, I have just done like a 2-hour photo shoot with that car before I started filming, because typically I'm shooting 200 to 300 photos so it can go on Bring a Trailer. And then the car will go on Bring a Trailer and sell, and then we bring in the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's how I end up with access to all these cars, which is one of the number one questions that I get on the internet when they're like, well, I want to start doing this. How did you get access to cars? Like, it's not there's no trick to it. Like I have a photography business, I have a video business, and I provide a service to my customers. And part of the service too became the fact that like I have a following. So getting these cars out there and being filmed and presented on my channel is another added benefit for their marketing, really. You know, I mean, I don't pull any punches though. I'm not there to sell their car. I'm there to drive the car. So I do still, you know, make comments if there's things I don't like about stuff, but usually it's just about the car in general. If you were buying that car on Bring a Trailer, it's because you wanted that car. So if I say, oh, I don't love the steering, like that's likely not dissuading a buyer on an auction site from buying the car. But you know, we have had to drive some pretty heavy stuff in terms of financial weight on, you know, salty roads. And people get salty about this. It's kind of wild. And I understand it. Like, I don't really drive my cars in the winter, but if I go and drive the car for 15 or 20 miles for the review and the video, it goes right back, and Justin's washing it in Bond Group. Like they're not sitting there covered in wet, salty messes underneath. They're getting washed up. But it's been fun because I've gotten to drive like 911R, GT3 Touring back to back. What a duo. Because in 2016, when the 911R came out, this was like the explosion of Porsche's modern style of popularity, in my opinion. I mean, I guess it's fact, but this is when I started really coming on board with these cars. And the idea that like, oh, they're exclusive, because Porsches were never really that exclusive. They were available, and they were kind of just cars for like prick lawyers, right? Like until Magnus Walker came along and showed that like, you know, there's another side to Porsche ownership. This was very much like a stodgy kind of thing to me, in my, like, from what I saw. Like, I didn't look at Porsches and think, oh, I have to have one of those. And then Magnus comes along and shows like this could actually be really cool. Like you can personalize this. You don't have to worry about like the purity of everything. Like Ferraris, like if you put a different set of wheels on a Ferrari, like sacrilege. Ferrari's basically coming at you saying like, take our badge off your car. You've ruined it. This isn't us. And whereas Porsche, I think embraced their own community in terms of personalization, customization, and use. And I liked that from Magnus. So then, you know, around that same era, the 911R comes out when Porsche has denied its customer base of a manual transmission. It went away because the 991.1 GT3 was paddles only. PDK, baby, because this is the fastest way around a track. We build fast cars. So why are you shifting your own fucking gears, you clown? Well, it turns out that people like purity and rawness and feel. And it doesn't necessarily matter that the car can set a 7-minute lap time around the Nürburgring if the car isn't as engaging and fun to drive as the previous generation. So Porsche comes out with the 911R, which is basically a 911 GT3 RS as a touring model, before we were calling that a touring really, and wingless, Great aero underneath to keep it stuck to the ground. Lightweight. It's like 3,000 pounds, which is really wild for a car of that size. 991 is a big car. It's not like a little 88 air cooler like I've got, but it weighs not much more. And a bunch of great materials used. You've got a carbon frunk, you've got magnesium roof, you've got these great wheels, and it embodied the driving heritage and raw spirit that Porsche owners wanted. So the other side of it was that it came with a manual transmission, and you could not get a GT3 with a manual transmission until this car came out. And they didn't make that many of them. So that was a problem because the scarcity thing became a scramble to buy. And while their MSRP was $185,000, you option it out, maybe you're at 190 to 200. And that quickly escalated. People were trying to sell. I think one of them sold for a little over $1 million. Only one though. And then people were asking like 800. I think most of the cars that actually sold in like the 911R boom were somewhere in the $500,000 to $600,000 range. Now they're lower, but not by much. I mean, you're looking at like, I think 375 to 400 or so, or just 450 maybe. That's still very high, but it triggered this thing in the Porsche community where we were like, wait a minute. What do we actually value about these cars? Because is it just the lap time? Because if an autonomous car company came out and made a car that drives the Nürburgring in 5 minutes and 52 seconds, like, well, do we care? Is this something that matters to us? Because it's autonomous. I didn't drive it. So I know that's like a stretch when we're talking about gearboxes and automatic versus manual, but it did highlight to the GT department that, hey, you know what? People want to drive their own cars. They want to feel these things. So that led to Porsche not being thrilled about the resale market on the 911R and coming out with the 991.2 generation, where they offered A, a manual transmission, and B, a touring version, which was a wingless thing, kind of like a 911R. And that's great. What's funny though, is that although the specs on paper look very similar, 4-liter, flat six, 6-speed manual transmission, rear wheel drive, relatively lightweight, they look the same on paper. They do not drive the same. And that's where I'm like, man, I have the best job in the world because I was able to drive the single mass flywheel with reinforced clutch option 911R, a must have. The dual mass is not as satisfying, still excellent, but not as satisfying. Sorry to those who own that I'm insulting right now. But the GT3 Touring, dual mass flywheel, a little bit heavier, a little bit lazier, especially on the downshifts. The auto rev matching on the 991.2, it's not as abrupt and wild and raucous and lightning fast as the 911R is, which there's like these little subtle differences that you just go, wow. And while the car maybe like through its DNA is only like a 2% change between car to car, 2% makes a big difference because like I said in the video, I think a chimpanzee is only like a 2% difference in DNA to a human. And like a chimpanzee and a human look pretty different. So they might be largely the same thing genetically, but they have very, very different impacts when you see them and you use them. So I just felt so lucky that I could like jump into a 911R and a GT3 Touring and very much debunk the idea that the Touring is simply a cheaper, more attainable, less rare version of the 911R. No, the 911R really has legs and it feels lighter. And that's just super special to me. So, that's what I've been doing to try to keep myself sane this winter, is simply to be driving cars, filming cars, doing my best to keep up with the channel, which can be difficult. I had like some things happen last year with some like relationships, friendships. I had a relationship that was maybe one of the most chaotic things I've ever experienced. Like, honestly, I've had some really wild experiences in terms of like my career, my life, the people in my life. But this relationship took the cake for like most insane chaos. I think that's the way to put it. And I don't want to go into details because it's not really fair to have a one-sided discussion on something like that. But anyone who heard this story was like, wow, what the fuck? And the point of it isn't to say like, hey, this happened to me. The point of it was like, I just didn't really want to be perceived for a little while. I didn't want to be out there. And that's a really difficult thing, because when you're dealing with something and you're struggling with something, but your job is public, your job is YouTube or podcasting or Instagram or being in the public eye, it is difficult to continue doing that. And I managed to do it, but I just took such a different approach. Like I stopped doing the live streams. I stopped a lot of stuff because I think I just wanted to kind of be a little more reclusive for a little bit. And I'm finally kind of coming out of my shell again and getting out of that, because I want to be more public. I want to be more engaged with the audience. I want to do stuff that's a little more social. And it has taken me a long time to kind of get back to that. But dude, it is wild. I think there's a lot of YouTubers that you'll see in the past where they either quit or disappear. And I didn't necessarily understand those things at the time. And now I fully get it. Like I fully understand not wanting to put yourself on camera. I fully understand not wanting to talk to anybody. I fully understand not wanting to hear rumors about you. I would go on, I would get links to like forums that were talking about me in my relationship and saying like, hey, what happened to that boyfriend, or what happened to this? What happened to that? I'm like, oh my God, like it wasn't something that I was going to go public with. It wasn't something that I was going to talk about, because it's just not anyone's business necessarily. But it was wild that what I was kind of recovering from and dealing with was in the public space. And that's my own doing, because this is my job. This is the career that I've cultivated for myself. So it's not surprising that people would talk, but I'll tell you, when it happens to you, it does feel like a big invasion of privacy, or weird, or just like it encouraged me not to talk very much. So in that time, I started sticking with kind of the things that I was really, really familiar with, which was just simple car reviews, just present the car, drive the car. I wasn't doing like the therapy drives. I wasn't really talking about myself that much. I think the podcasting took a backseat, because the podcast, listen to this. The podcast is personal. The podcast is usually a lot more intimate than the YouTube channel, but I definitely backed off of all that stuff. So I'm trying to get back into it, because I do like this, and I want to express myself, and I don't want to feel like I have to be like in the closet, with all of these pieces of my life, instead of just expressing myself. You're always going to have obstacles that make you feel like you need to just curl up into a ball and walk away from stuff. But like the reality is like, people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. That's narcissistic and insane. Even when you find a forum about yourself, that's a small group of people. And the other side of it is, if you don't have that like freedom of self-expression and being able to do stuff, then like everything else around you suffers. And I started like having more fun with this. And it's funny. I've been, yes, we've been reviewing all the fun Bond Group cars, but one of the things that I do occasionally, I'll drive some new cars. And I do like to do this because it's part of like the deal, right? You go to different press launches for brand new cars, or they send you a press car here and there. And that's fun. It keeps you in touch with the automotive journalist community, if you'd like to call it that. And recently, a lot of the cars that have been coming out are like electric vehicles, right? And EVs, dude, like it's such a weird relationship, because the government is in such like chaotic flux of what an EV should be at this point. Like at first it was going to be the 100% future. This is what we're doing. They're going to be mandating that we move to hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and then eventually electrics and all that stuff. It feels like that's going away. And they were incentivized because you get a $7,500 tax credit. I think that's still available at the time of this recording, but I would not be surprised if that goes away. And the automakers were utilizing that government subsidy, that tax credit essentially, to promote their vehicles, because they were cheap. They were not cheap, but like cheaper. If you go to a Tesla website and look at the pricing, I'm pretty sure they show the tax incentive price before. You have to click another button to see the full price of the vehicle. They're going to show you the price of the vehicle after the $7,500 credit, versus showing you like, hey, this is a $50,000 car minus $7,500. So that even can be a little misleading in that world, but we don't know what's going to happen with these things. This is all very strange, and it's forced. Think about this. It's forced like Ford and GM to build giant factories in order to produce electric cars. And if the future or the foreseeable future is no longer going to be so EV dependent, whether you like it or not, it is a major change in business strategy for these companies that just invested billions of dollars into these factories. And this is why I really would love to have Kevin Williams on the podcast at some point. I don't know if he's still fully freelance. He writes a lot for Inside EVs and stuff, but he's great because I don't know anyone else who knows the EV market inside and out like Kevin. And he pulls zero punches. His writing is fantastic. He's not messing around. This is someone who is not bought and sold by anybody. And it's so refreshing to read his articles about the market because he's somebody who's very much in that market. He's owned and fixed up lots of old EVs and, he's kind of bought and sold them on his own, but he's also like fully aware of like the global EV market where he goes to China and drives like BYD cars. And he's like, holy crap, like these are better than what we have back home and they're cheaper. This is great. I love this. And I would like to talk to him more about this, but the idea that we're going into this EV market is really difficult to fathom because first of all, there was like a boom, right? Like there's like the little Tesla boom that everyone went out and finally bought a Model Y, a Model 3. And for a little while, people were I have friends who bought Model Ys or Model 3s, drove them for a little bit and sold them for a profit. Like they were appreciating. Now, oh my God, these things are in the toilet. Like if you spent the 60 or even 70 grand, if you bought FSD on like a Model 3 Performance from 2020 or something like that, those vehicles are like half the value that they sold for. So there was a little bit of a boom. And then you had the pickup truck boom where you had the Ford Lightning come out, which was a huge deal. If you remember, Ford Lightning comes out, it was a mad dash to get one. The ADM was high. People were paying over sticker, and then they'd sell them at a profit. You could not go on a lot and get one. That was impossible. And now, at the time, GM's touting that they were going to come out with a vehicle with a 440 mile range. They were like, we're going to do this Silverado and Sierra EV pickup. It's going to blow Ford out of the water with their range, but the car was delayed because of, I think it was, I'm speculating. If memory serves, I remember it being like issues with Ultium platform batteries and stuff like that where, oh shit, like this was supposed to come out now and it's now delayed 6 months. And I want to say it ended up being delayed by like a year or 18 months, but regardless of what that time frame was, it was enough time for Ford F-150 Lightning to sort of like hit the market, rise like a star, and then kind of fall off because everyone was so hyped about this and the hype was not that long lived. So unfortunately, at the time that like Silverado EV launches, yes, it has very, very, very long range, 440 miles. Like that's wild. And then the Sierra EV Denali Max is 460 miles. This is like, that's a lot for an EV. Very few cars in the EV market are like over 400 miles. But when they launched, like, I think people were already kind of like, yeah, I don't know if this is what we want. I don't know. And they're not cheap either because you're spending about $100,000 on these trucks. And they're also not magic. I just had the Sierra EV and it has a 205 kilowatt hour battery. I mean, that's massive. And it's not getting its range because it's like this sleek aerodynamic mystic that's gliding through the air and with highly, highly efficient motors. No, I mean, I was not even able to get 2 miles per kilowatt hour out of this vehicle. And the thing is though, I could tell what the market was doing based on my YouTube views because I could film an EV and it would tank. It would just do nothing. And this just happened to me again. I had the Sierra EV Denali. Great, like honestly, nice to drive. It's easy to pick these things apart and say, oh, it's inefficient or it's, nearly 9,000 pounds or you can play that game. But at the end of the day, I'm like, it's not a bad vehicle to drive. It's just that it's expensive at $100,000. We don't know what the depreciation is going to look like. And so for a lot of reasons, sometimes these don't necessarily make economic sense in the market, but they could be objectively decent vehicles to own, live with, and drive. But I can tell that there's not that much excitement over it because if I post a video that has a hot car or a car that is starting to become exciting in the market, like an LFA, like had a big resurgence, it was never like LFA launches, it's a dud. No one really cares. Suddenly LFAs become like, hey, remember when Toyota and Yamaha made this insane V10 and it sounds great? Well, yeah, then you have this big LFA boom. I managed to get my videos in with the LFA that Team Champagne Ninjas has in a time frame where that was really exciting, and everyone goes on. You get millions of views on these things. Well, if the interest goes away, the views go away, and the idea that you can basically use YouTube as an indicator of the car market is really interesting to me, because sometimes I will post a car that I objectively think is maybe like an ordinary, somewhat boring car, but if it's like a Honda Civic, it's a new generation of Honda Civic, like it's going to generate a ton of views because that's a car that millions of people are considering buying. Whereas I post this Sierra EV and it's like, it's crawling with these views. It's so slow because I just don't think very many people are like earnestly and honestly considering spending $100,000 on an electric vehicle like that, which is a bummer when you're a car company, when you're an automaker and you're like, oh my God, we have just invested like billions into a platform, into this thing. And like people aren't going gangbusters over the thing that we bet on, It's frustrating. And again, I'm not like an EV nerd. I'm not someone who I haven't bought one. I'm likely not going to, especially now, because who knows what the market is going to do. But it is interesting that like as a YouTuber, I can be both personally impacted by it because I'm not getting views on a car that I spent the same amount of time on as any other car. And at the other side of it, like I'm impacted where I'm like, wow, like I'm actually viewing what the market values, which is kind of fascinating. So whenever I see like automotive news about sales and stuff, I'm almost never surprised because I'm like, well, if I've driven those cars, I actually know what the interest in those cars is like. And something I'm genuinely worried about right now is that there are very, very few affordable cars. I will casually review a vehicle and be like, oh yeah, it's $98,000. And like, sometimes I forget. I'm like, I wouldn't even buy. I can't even afford that. And who can? And that's what's really scary about the auto market right now is that I think we're in a real desperate need for cheap cars. And right now, like a cheap car is $35,000. There's very few things under $30,000. Thankfully, we still have like Civic and Corolla in these cars that are kind of in that realm. But like, I do think there's a huge need for like the $18,000 to $22,000 car. And there's a few of them, you've got like a Chevy Trax or something like that. Like they exist, but there's not a massive option list for these types of things. And I am genuinely concerned for both the younger generation who absolutely relies on this, whether you're a college student or a high school student or someone who's just starting out a job, or just like a young professional or a middle-aged professional who's in a field that doesn't earn six figures. Like if you're just like a lot of people don't earn six figures. A lot of, we look on the internet and you think like, oh, social media makes us think that like everybody's some like fucking tech bro entrepreneur trading crypto for billions of dollars. Like this is just not the case. Like if you're a high school art teacher, you make $55,000 a year. Like maybe you might not even make that much. What do you drive? Because the cars that withstood the test of time, the cars that were like bulletproof are going to be like the Toyotas, the Lexuses, some of like those golden era Mercedes and stuff. But like you still have to put a lot of second, like later down the line work into those cars to keep them running. So you need to have the independent shop. These people are just constantly having to like maintain these cars. And it's just wild that you can be working a straight up full-time benefits job with a 401k and not be able to afford a reasonably cheap car to get to work and back, because we are in America, we're very, very car dependent. There's very few places in this country where you can rely on public transportation appropriately, because if you can rely on public transportation, it means you're already living in a very overpriced city. So you might be fucked anyway, because your rent is like $4,000 a month for a one bedroom. Gotta love Boston, San Francisco, LA, New York. It's fantastic out here. We're all drowning. When you need a car to get places in rural America. And if you're living and working in rural America or anywhere in the suburbs, like chances are your salary also is lower than it would have been if you were in one of those very expensive cities. You are limited in your options and you have to be very savvy. And I don't, for the average person, not even the enthusiast, like they're just looking for a thing that can execute the drive, just A to B, just get me there and back. Maybe don't look like a turd. Maybe don't cost me thousands of dollars when these tires go or these brakes go, or I need like basic maintenance and stuff. Like, if I gave someone an E92 M3 as a gift, like if they don't make a lot of money, it's going to suck for them when that check engine light hits and they've got to replace all these sensors or the rod bearings or the brakes, or like it's thousands of dollars. For me as an enthusiast, it's like a sacrifice that I'm willing to make because it's like, well, this is the thing that I like the most. But imagine if all of us had to buy a piano, like you wouldn't enjoy that. That would be a nightmare because you're like, well, I don't even play the fucking piano. But it's like, oh, to get to work, you have to buy a piano. Like for people, I would feel bad for people who don't like cars or don't really care about cars because they still have to have one. And that's a bummer. And I think a couple things are going to happen in the next few years. We're going to see a surge. We're going to see a surge in cheaper cars coming on the market. My fear is that they're going to be dog shit. They're going to be really cheap. They're going to be overly cheap because what I'm noticing is even in the more expensive cars, like the E-classes, the C-classes, the S-classes, the materials have gotten cheaper. A lot of cost cutting has occurred in the luxury market. So it makes me worry about how cheap is a cheap car going to appear and feel and operate. That is gonna not be fun. And I sincerely hope that these car companies, when they make, these $20,000 cars, they take into consideration that we don't want to be peasants in them. We don't want junk. We need the car, but we also want to have something slightly decent. I don't know if we're going to get that. I don't know how that's going to go down because right now, I think the average purchase price of a new car in the United States is $49,000. That's really high. That's a lot of money. The most I had ever spent on a car was my Porsche many, many years ago for like $40,000. And even then people were like, oh, you're paying too much. Thank God, like the market went up. But that was a stretch for me. It was a big deal. And I don't know how someone in their teens or 20s can afford anything. I understand they're not buying new cars, but used cars aren't that fucking cheap either. There's very few things out there. So, make sure that if you're talking to people who are struggling in their, to afford a car, like have some fucking compassion because like your first car probably cost a couple grand and those don't exist anymore. You won't really find like a $2,000 or $3,000 car that you're going to like drive through high school and college. Like it will just die or they just don't exist. You're going to have to spend like $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 to get a decent first car. And it's just a tough pill to swallow. And I sincerely hope that we're able to make this easier. And I do wish we had better public transportation because I think it would solve everything. If we had like high-speed railways, reliable, good public transportation, it would benefit everybody because a lot of people wouldn't need to have cars. People would be happier, frankly, because they'd be able to get to where they needed to get without spending a shitload of money. And this is the thing. I always find it weird that like car enthusiasts get mad about like buses, trains. I'm like, that if there's more buses and trains that are reliable for people, there's less cars on the road, which means there's less traffic. Oh my God, how wonderful for you. So, always look at the cause and effect of stuff because, if you get better public transportation, the world for an auto enthusiast gets much better. Also, the focus on emissions probably declines significantly because if there's a billion fucking cars on American roads because there's no other way to get around, the emission standards are going to continue to be tighter and tighter and tighter. Whereas if it's like, well, yeah, we took half the cars off the road because there's better public transportation that's using less fossil fuels and all this other stuff and emitting less CO2. Well, guess what? They're not going to focus so hard on your daily driver. It's not going to matter as much. Now, obviously, this doesn't benefit the auto industry because if they're selling less cars, they're making less money, their stock goes down. But, such is the economy. It's kind of a bummer. So with that, I just want to say thank you guys so much for listening. I know this is kind of a rambling discussion, or just me, monologuing, but I wanted to try it out and see what it is. And maybe we get more podcasts if I don't always have to book a guest and I can just kind of pontificate and talk about what's going on in my life. So I hope you're staying sane. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying happy this winter. It has been difficult. It's been a very difficult winter. Despite like not really even getting that much snow, I think in New England, it was just cold, dark, depressing. Try to stay active, and try to make my unsolicited advice for your fitness is make your fitness routine about being healthy mentally and physically, and just let your physical appearance improvements be a byproduct of those things, right? If you force the habit of like going to the gym, going for a walk, going for a run, doing whatever you can to stay somewhat healthy, like you will reap the benefits because you'll look in the mirror and be like, oh, that's pretty good. That's nice. I genuinely believe that people who purely look in the mirror and go to the gym or work out just so that mirror reflects back at them what they'd like to see, I think it doesn't work as well. I think you end up in a position where you resent that the changes aren't happening fast enough, so you quit, or you just end up not even appreciating the progress you've made because it's never enough. And then you end up in another mental health crisis where you're just upset with your physical appearance and you never appreciate where you are until 10 years later, you look at a photo of yourself and you're like, man, why wasn't I happy? I was hot. So, hey, you're pretty fucking hot. And I hope you're gearing up, getting the tires, the brakes sorted, the oil changes, getting that project card buttoned up so it's good for April or May. I'm psyched that I've got some Bridgestones mounted here at Garage 42. Thank God they mount tires. It was like a little treat that I just came here and my tires were on my wheels. What a luxury. What a spoiled little brat I am that I just walk in. I'm like, oh, cool. Those are mine. Neat. Great. Thank you. But anyway, I'm also just thrilled that I've been able to keep up on all the maintenance of the cars lately. So we'll talk about the cars next time, I think, because I've got a lot of big things happening with the M5 that I have not yet told my mechanic are going to happen, so I need to book that. The Porsche, definitely going to be driving that a bunch this year, and hold me to it. Beg me if I don't make enough Porsche content. I want to drive the damn thing. And I can't wait to just park that fucking Lexus and drive my Honda all summer long at 30 miles per gallon because my God, that V8 in the Lexus sucks fuel. Kind of sick of 18 miles per gallon. So don't forget to respect the drive, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget also to please rate the podcast 5 stars. My God, this might not be the podcast I should be asking you to be doing that on because this episode is different and weird and maybe you don't like it. But please give it 5 stars. Tell your friends and stay safe out there. Talk to you soon.